The rain hadn't stopped for 3 days in Seattle. It fell against the windows of Amira Johnson's small therapy office like an endless heartbeat, steady, soft, but full of something ancient. Outside, the city wore its usual gray coat, neon lights blurring through raindrops like half-forgotten dreams. Inside, the air smelled faintly of sage and cedar warmth, meeting melancholy. Amira, 32, with skin the color of deep bronze and eyes that carried both kindness and mystery, was clearing away her notes after a long day. She was more than a therapist. People said she had a gift, a quiet knowing. She called it intuition. Others called it prophecy. As she reached to turn off the small salt lamp by her desk, the bell above the door chimed. A man stepped in, tall, sharply dressed, water dripping from his black coat. The scent of rain and something expensive followed him. Ms. Johnson, his voice was deep, careful, as though every word had been calculated before it left his mouth. She looked up and smiled, with that calm warmth her patients always mentioned in their reviews. "Yes, please come in. You must be Mr. Walker." He nodded once. Ethan Walker, founder and CEO of Walker Tech, one of the most powerful tech empires in the country. A man whose name appeared on magazine covers, but whose eyes looked as if they'd forgotten what peace felt like. He didn't sit right away. Instead, he looked around the softly lit room, the plants, the shelves of crystals, the quiet hum of jazz from a corner speaker. "My mother insisted I come," he said finally. "She's been having dreams, the same one over and over. She thinks it means something." Amira tilted her head, curious. "And what does she dream? A car crash," he said simply, "and someone pulling me out of it. She says the woman had your voice." For a brief second, Amira's breath caught. She hid it behind a small, knowing smile. "Well," she said gently, "let's see what your mother's mind is trying to tell her." Ethan sat across from her, tension coiled in his shoulders. She asked him to close his eyes, to breathe, to let his pulse settle. Her voice was soft, low, like the rhythm of the rain. When she placed her fingertips on his wrist to measure his heartbeat, a flash tore through her mind. A road slick with rain, a silver car spinning out of control, the sound of breaking glass, and then her own hands, trembling, bloodied, pulling a man from the wreckage. His face, pale, unconscious, but alive. The same face, now sitting across from her. Amira froze. The image vanished as suddenly as it came, leaving her throat dry and her pulse uneven. "Are you all right?" Ethan asked, studying her. His voice softened for the first time. "You look like you've seen a ghost." She forced a breath and nodded. "Sometimes. Energy reveals what words cannot." Energy. His lips twitched, part skepticism, part amusement. "You mean intuition?" Amira smiled faintly. "Call it what you will, but what I saw was powerful." "What did you see?" She hesitated. The truth pressed against her ribs, aching to be spoken. But she wasn't ready to open that door. Not yet. So she chose her words carefully. "I saw water, a storm, and a woman reaching out her hand to save a man who'd lost his way. Is that supposed to be me?" Her eyes met his, dark and unwavering. "You tell me." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It pulsed between them like static before a lightning strike. When the session ended, Ethan stood by the door. The rain outside had turned heavier, the sound almost deafening against the glass. "You don't really believe in fate, do you?" he asked. Amira looked at him. The billionaire who believed in data, not destiny, algorithms, not emotion. "Fate," she echoed softly. "No. but I believe some people are meant to meet no matter how far they've run." He stared at her a moment longer, as if trying to read the truth behind her calm exterior. "And what happens?" he said finally when they do meet. She smiled, a slow, knowing curve of her lips. "Then everything they thought they knew begins to change." He left without another word. The door closed, leaving Amira alone in the soft hum of the rain. She pressed her palm against her chest where her heart still beat too fast. In the reflection of the window, the storm blurred her outline, and for a fleeting second she saw it again, the same car, the same crash, the same man, Ethan Walker, and her hands reaching for him through the smoke. She whispered to the empty room, "You already met the woman who saved you, Ethan. You just don't remember." Outside, thunder rolled over the city. Inside, Amira closed her eyes, torn between fear and something dangerously close to longing. Sometimes, the universe doesn't send us answers. It sends us people. And maybe, just maybe, the one you've been waiting for has already walked through your door. If this story stirred something in your heart tonight, hold it close. Love, after all, always finds its way back through the rain. Ethan Walker had never been the kind of man who trusted anything he couldn't quantify. In his world, every problem had a pattern, every risk a number, and every outcome, if you were clever enough, could be controlled. That's why, when he left Amira Johnson's office that rainy afternoon, he told himself it was nothing but a well-executed performance, a play for his mother's fragile heart, wrapped in candlelight and soft-voiced mystery. Still, as he drove down the slick Seattle streets, the image of her stayed, the calm in her eyes, the warmth in her tone, the strange heaviness in the air when she touched his wrist. He shook his head. Nonsense, he thought. Just psychology, not prophecy. The highway shimmered under the rain. Ethan's Tesla glided through puddles, the rhythmic wipers keeping time with the storm. He was replaying a meeting in his head, numbers, valuations, contracts, when suddenly his phone lit up on the dashboard. Unknown caller. He frowned. The moment he reached to decline, a flash of light exploded ahead, a truck veering out of its lane, its tires screaming on the wet asphalt. Ethan jerked the wheel. The world spun. For one terrible second, everything went white. The sound of metal, the pounding of his own heartbeat, the unbearable silence that followed. Then a voice cut through the chaos. Calm, firm, familiar. "Sir, stay with me. Don't move. Help is coming. Can you hear me?" He blinked. The emergency line was still open. The voice on the other end, steady, soothing. "Sir, listen to my voice. You're going to be all right." And that voice, low, melodic, laced with something both comforting and impossible, sent a shock through him. It was her, Amira Johnson. The same voice that told him earlier that day, "You will meet the woman who saved you." When the police arrived, the truck driver was gone, just skid marks and shattered glass. Ethan's car, though battered, had somehow stopped inches from the guardrail. No one could explain why the airbags hadn't deployed, or how the vehicle's autopilot had disengaged seconds before the collision. He refused the hospital. He just sat there in the back of the patrol car, rain dripping from his hair, replaying her voice in his head. He told himself it was a coincidence. There are thousands of women with that tone, that cadence. But the lie didn't hold. By morning, sleep had fled and logic felt thin. The next afternoon, he found himself standing outside her office again, his coat still damp from the drizzle. Amira looked up from her desk when he entered. She didn't seem surprised, just quietly expectant, as if she had already known he would return. "Mr. Walker," she greeted softly. "You came back." "I didn't plan to," he said, "but something happened." He told her everything. The truck, the voice, the way he'd felt her words echo through him. like an old memory. When he finished, silence filled the room. Amira folded her hands, her gaze steady. "I'm glad you're alive." "You're not surprised," he said. "Should I be?" "You predicted it." She shook her head slowly. "I didn't predict it. I felt it." That word felt irritated him. It was too soft, too vague. He needed proof, not poetry. "Then explain it to me, scientifically." Amira smiled, not mocking, but patient, as though she'd heard the same question from 100 skeptical hearts. "You want a formula?" she said quietly. "But life doesn't always speak in equations. Sometimes it whispers in echoes, feelings, coincidences, memories that loop until we listen." He leaned back in his chair, frustration simmering under the surface. "You sound like a fortune cookie." Her eyes softened. "And you sound like a man who's afraid of what he can't control." For the first time in years, he had no answer. A crack of thunder rolled outside. Through the window, the world blurred in streaks of gray and silver. Ethan rubbed his temples. "You're saying this connection, whatever it is, it's real." Amira's voice dropped to a whisper. "I'm saying something is asking to be understood. By me. By both of us, perhaps." He exhaled the sound heavy in the quiet room. "You know I built a company from nothing. I can predict the rise and fall of markets, the behavior of investors, the next 10 steps of my competitors. But this," he gestured between them, "this doesn't fit anywhere." Amira tilted her head. "Maybe it's not meant to." He stared at her, his jaw tight. "So what am I supposed to do with that?" She smiled faintly. "Maybe stop trying to solve it." When he left that evening, he didn't say goodbye. But as he stepped into the rain, he found himself glancing back through the glass door. She was still there, sitting at her desk, head bowed as if she were carrying a secret she couldn't yet speak aloud. He stood there longer than he meant to. There was something about the way she sat poised, unhurried, utterly grounded, that made the chaos inside him quiet for a moment. That night he dreamed of the crash again. Only this time the dream ended differently. The rain stopped. The woman's hand reached through the smoke, and when he looked up, it wasn't a stranger's face he saw. It was hers. Amira. He woke before dawn, his heart hammering the echo of her touch, still burning in his skin, though she had never touched him beyond that single brush of her fingers on his wrist. The city was still sleeping. He poured a glass of water, stood by the window, and watched the rain slide down the glass. Same rhythm, same quiet persistence as before. For a man who built his life on evidence, he found himself haunted by something far more elusive. Not fear, not fascination. Something he could not name. And somewhere deep inside, beneath the pride, beneath the logic, Ethan Walker, the man who didn't believe in destiny, felt the smallest crack in his certainty. A question he could no longer ignore. Who was Amira Johnson? Really? Ethan Walker had always believed there were only two kinds of people in the world, those who built things and those who merely watched. He was the former disciplined, efficient, armored by reason. Yet somehow, Amira Johnson had slipped through the cracks in that armor, without even trying. It began when he invited her to Walker Tech headquarters, under the pretext of needing a consultant for a new corporate wellness initiative. But in truth, he simply wanted a reason to see her again, one that didn't require admitting he'd been thinking about her every night since the crash. The first day she walked into his office, the energy changed. The space, normally cold and precise with glass steel and screens, suddenly felt warmer. She carried it with her, that quiet kind of peace that didn't demand attention, but commanded it anyway. "Thank you for coming," he said, standing a little too quickly. Her smile was soft. You said the project was about emotional health for your employees. That's a rare thing to hear from someone like you. Someone like me. A man who measures his worth in numbers. He was used to being challenged by executives, investors, the media, but never like this. Her words weren't meant to wound, they were mirrors. He found himself smiling before he could stop. Maybe I'm ready to measure differently. In the weeks that followed, their worlds began to overlap. Amira sat in on meetings with his team, translating the language of stress and silence into something human. She didn't talk about profit or productivity. She talked about peace, purpose, breathing. At first, Ethan resisted. He caught himself scanning her presentation slides for data that wasn't there. You can't quantify serenity, she had said, amused, when he asked for metrics. He'd frowned. Then how do I know it's working? You'll feel it, she replied simply, and to his discomfort he did. Their conversations began to stretch beyond work. Some afternoons, she would bring him tea instead of coffee, saying, "You think too fast. This will slow your mind." He'd raise an eyebrow but drink it anyway. Other times, she would stop by his office, tilt her head at the massive city skyline beyond his window, and say, "Do you ever notice how people build higher and higher, as if to prove they're not afraid of falling?" He had looked at her, then realizing she wasn't talking about buildings. One evening, after a long day of back-to-back investor calls, Ethan found her still in the office, seated cross-legged on the floor of the conference room, lights dimmed, the city glowing below. "What are you doing?" he asked. "Meditation," she said, not opening her eyes. "You should try it." He hesitated, then sat across from her, awkward in his suit. "Close your eyes," she whispered. "Breathe in through your nose, out through your mouth. Let go of everything you're holding." He tried, but letting go had never been his strength. His life was built on control. After a moment, she spoke again. "Tell me, Ethan, what scares you the most?" He opened his eyes. She was watching him now, calm, waiting. He thought about the question longer than he wanted to. "Losing," he said finally. "Losing people, losing myself, losing the illusion that I have control." Amira's expression softened. "Control is a beautiful lie. It keeps us safe until it breaks." "And you?" he asked quietly. "What scares you?" She hesitated, her gaze drifting to the window. The reflection of the city lights shimmered across her face like tiny constellations. "Remembering," she said. He didn't understand then. Not yet. But something in the way she said it left a quiet ache in his chest. Over time, something began to shift between them. It wasn't sudden. It was the kind of change that sneaks in quietly between glances held too long, silences too comfortable, and smiles that meant more than they should. He found himself listening when she spoke, not to her words, but to the way she spoke. Every sentence seemed to carry a rhythm like poetry. She could talk about pain and make it sound almost beautiful. Once during a late meeting, she told him, "Do you know why people fear love, Ethan? Because love is the one thing you can't negotiate with. It asks for surrender." He had smiled faintly, and surrender is failure. She shook her head. "No, sometimes surrender is grace." But for every inch he moved closer, she took one step back. Amira felt it too. The pull, the impossible gravity between them. But she knew what he didn't. She knew the truth that could unravel everything. Some nights she'd wake from dreams of that old crash, the twisted metal, the fire, the sound of his heartbeat against her palms. The memory was both blessing and curse. Saving him had been instinct. Loving him now felt like defiance against fate. Because if he remembered, if he realized she was the woman from that night, everything between them would shift from choice to debt, from love to obligation. And Amira had spent too long being the one who healed others to ever want to be someone's redemption story. One night, as rain pressed gently against the windows, Ethan walked her to her car after another long day. "You ever think about destiny?" he asked, his tone light but curious. "Every day," she said softly. "It's part of my job." He smiled. "And what's your professional opinion?" "That destiny gives us choices," she said. "The hard part is recognizing when one is standing right in front of you." Their eyes met under the streetlight. For a heartbeat, neither moved. Then Amira glanced away. "Good night, Ethan." He watched her go, that familiar tug in his chest, returning like a song he couldn't stop humming. Back in his penthouse, Ethan sat in silence, surrounded by everything money could buy, art, glass, technology, but none of it filled the quiet. His reflection in the window looked older than he remembered. He thought of Amira's words. "Control is a beautiful lie." For the first time, he began to wonder if his empire had been built on one. At the same hour, across town, Amira sat on her small balcony, a blanket around her shoulders, tea steaming in her hands. She stared at the city lights and whispered into the night, as if to something unseen. "You brought him back to me. But what do you want me to do with this?" the wind answered with a soft sigh, carrying with it the scent of rain. Amira closed her eyes. Somewhere deep inside, she could still feel the echo of that night years ago. The sirens, the cold metal, the moment his pulse returned under her touch. She had promised herself then that saving his life would be enough. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. 3 years earlier, the world had been different, simpler, or perhaps just quieter. Back then, Amira Johnson had worn a different kind of uniform, blue scrubs, worn shoes, and the weight of compassion stitched into every shift. She volunteered as an emergency medical aide for a small hospital near the edge of Seattle, a place that smelled of antiseptic coffee and exhaustion. She had chosen that work because it made her feel close to something sacred. Saving lives, even briefly, was her way of keeping faith with a world that too often looked away from people like her. That night, the night everything changed, the rain was relentless. She was on her way home from a 12-hour shift when the radio crackled, multiple car collision on Highway 405. Unknown fatalities. She could have driven past. Her shift was over. But something inside her, that old impossible instinct to help, made her turn the wheel. By the time she arrived, flashing lights cut through the darkness. A sedan had spun into the guardrail, the front twisted like paper. Steam hissed from the hood. A man was trapped inside. Amira rushed forward. "We need cutters," she shouted to the paramedics, but they were still tending to another car. Without waiting, she crawled through the shattered glass, her arms slick with rain and blood. "Sir, can you hear me?" she said. No response, just shallow breathing, erratic and fragile. She pressed her fingers to his neck. Pulse, faint but there. When the door finally gave way, she pulled him out, bracing his head, whispering words she didn't even know she was saying. "Stay with me. Just stay." His hand twitched, finding hers for a moment. Even unconscious, it felt like a plea, and as lightning flared above the highway, Amira saw his face clearly for the first time. She didn't know his name then, but she would soon. At the hospital, the nurses whispered about the man who'd been admitted to the VIP ward, about how he was some kind of tech giant worth billions, about how lucky he was to be alive. When Amira walked into the room, her heart stumbled. He lay there surrounded by sterile machines and silence, the man from the wreck. the man whose heartbeat she'd kept alive with her own trembling hands. She checked his vitals, adjusted the IV, and told herself he was just another patient. But as she turned to leave, she noticed the tablet on the nightstand left open on a business article. The headline read, "Walker Tech expands acquisition of BrightPath Analytics." Her throat went dry. BrightPath Analytics, her old company, the one that had promised inclusivity, then quietly dismissed her after she'd spoken out about racial bias in promotions. She remembered the boardroom meetings, the polite smiles, the subtle exclusions, the way the CEO had mentioned, "Our investors prefer a more consistent image." And one of those investors had been Ethan Walker, the man now lying before her alive because she had refused to drive past. That night, Amira couldn't sleep. She sat in the staff lounge, her hands trembling around a paper cup of coffee. The world, she realized, had a cruel sense of irony. The man whose empire had helped push her out of her career was now breathing because of her. She could have told the press. She could have told him. But she didn't. Instead, when he finally woke days later, she wasn't there. She had already resigned, leaving behind a short note for the attending nurse. "He will recover. Tell him the universe gave him a second chance." She returned to her small apartment, packed her things, and disappeared from that chapter of her life. For years, she kept that night buried. She changed paths, left the hospital world, turned to emotional healing, studied therapy and energy work. Her past became something she carried quietly, like a scar beneath a silk sleeve. Until Ethan Walker walked into her office 3 years later, carrying rain on his coat and a ghost she thought she'd left behind. When she first saw him again, her instinct had been to run. But his eyes, clear, searching, human, made her stay. Maybe destiny wasn't finished with them yet. Now, months into their work together at Walker Tech, Ethan began to notice the inconsistencies in her story. She rarely talked about her life before. When others mentioned hospitals or medicine, she'd change the subject. Once, when a company driver picked her up and accidentally took the highway, near the crash site, she'd gone pale, fingers gripping the seatbelt like it was a lifeline. It stirred something in him. Curiosity, yes, but also unease. Because somewhere in his memory, there was a blank space, a fog between the moment of the accident and the morning he woke up in the hospital. Sometimes he dreamed of a woman's voice, warm, firm, whispering, "Stay with me." Sometimes he thought he could almost remember her face. And sometimes when Amira looked at him, just a second too long, the air between them seemed to hold that same silence he remembered from the dream. Fragile, infinite, unfinished. One night, he stayed late at the office. Most of the staff had gone home. Amira was still there, sorting through documents for the wellness project. He leaned against the doorway, watching her. "Can I ask you something?" he said quietly. She looked up. "Of course." "When did you move to Seattle a few years ago? Before or after the accident on Highway 405? Her pen stopped moving. For a heartbeat, neither of them spoke. Then she smiled carefully. "You've been Googling me," he returned her smile, though his didn't quite reach his eyes. "You're not easy to find, which is unusual in my world. Maybe some stories aren't meant to be online," she said. He nodded slowly. Maybe some stories aren't meant to stay buried. That night when she got home, Amira sat by her window, the same way she had on countless nights before. The rain had started again, light and steady. She thought about the way he'd looked at her, not accusing, but knowing. How long, she wondered, until he remembered everything. And when he did, would he still look at her the same way? In another part of the city, Ethan poured himself a drink and opened an old file he hadn't touched in years, the accident report. He scanned the pages. Time, location, weather injuries. Then a name leaped out from the list of responders. Volunteer, medic, Amira L. Johnson. He froze. A single line in black ink, small and unassuming, but it hit him like a current. The room blurred, replaced by flashes of memory. The rain, the hands pulling him free, the voice whispering through the dark. He whispered her name, almost afraid to hear it aloud. Amira. The truth was there, plain and undeniable. The woman he'd been searching for all these years, the one who haunted his dreams, had been by his side all along. The rain returned to Seattle like a memory that refused to fade. It drummed against rooftops and windows, echoing the rhythm of 1,000 things unsaid. That night, Ethan Walker stood outside Amira's small apartment, his coat soaked through his breath, visible in the cold air. He had told himself he wouldn't come, that there were questions better left unanswered, but he was already knocking before he could change his mind. The door opened. Amira stood there barefoot, wrapped in a loose gray sweater, her curls falling over her shoulders. The warmth of her home spilled into the hallway, carrying the scent of chamomile and rain. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Ethan said quietly, his voice tight, 3 years ago. Was it you? Were you the one who pulled me from that car? Amira's lips parted, but no sound came. The question hung between them like smoke, fragile, inescapable. She looked away, her eyes tracing the raindrops sliding down the glass door behind him. I thought you'd never remember, she whispered. He took a step closer. So it's true. Her silence was answer enough. Ethan exhaled sharply, running a hand through his rain-soaked hair. All this time, I was searching for you. I dreamed about that night, about a woman's voice, your voice, and those eyes. He stopped, his throat tightening. I thought they were just a trick of my mind. But it was you, wasn't it? Amira's voice trembled, soft, but steady. You weren't supposed to know. Why? Because you would have felt indebted. Because people like you men who build worlds out of logic, you don't know what to do with miracles. He almost smiled, though his eyes were shining now. Maybe I just didn't know what to do with you. The rain intensified, pounding the pavement, filling the silence that neither of them could break. Finally, Ethan said, You saved my life, and I didn't even know your name. You weren't meant to, she said. That night wasn't about names. Then, what was it about grace, she whispered, and letting go of what we can't control. He studied her for a long time. You walked away. Yes, you could have told me. I couldn't, she said. When I found out who you were, what company you'd invested in, it felt like fate's cruel joke. I had just lost everything because of that world. And then suddenly, I was saving the man at the top of it. Ethan closed his eyes, guilt cutting through him like the cold. I didn't know. I know, she said gently. You weren't the one who hurt me. But your name was written on the walls of the place that did. For a moment, neither of them moved. The storm howled outside, the sound of thunder rolling through the city like an argument with God. Ethan's voice was low when he spoke again. You said I wasn't supposed to remember. But I did. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw you. Your face, your hands, the rain. I tried to find you. I even thought I'd imagined you. He took a shaky breath. Until the day I met you again. Amira looked up, then her eyes meeting his steady, luminous, full of quiet ache. Maybe that's what destiny is. Not a plan, not a punishment. Just two people finding each other again when they were meant to. For a long, fragile second, time seemed to stop. Then Ethan reached for her hand. She didn't pull away. The touch was simple, his palm against hers, warm and trembling. And in the space between them, something shifted. All the walls, all the fear, all the years of silence, gone like mist, dissolving under light. He stepped closer, close enough to feel her breath. "Amira," he murmured, "you've been in my dreams for 3 years. I think I was always meant to find you." Her reply was a whisper lost to the storm. Maybe we were both meant to remember. When he kissed her, it wasn't sudden. It was inevitable. The kind of kiss that feels like coming home after being lost too long. Outside, the rain fell harder, cold, relentless, but neither of them moved. They stayed wrapped in each other, their foreheads pressed together, their hearts beating to the same quiet rhythm. But fate, ever patient, had been waiting for its cue. 2 days later, Ethan's company, Walker Tech, was on every news channel. Headlines screamed across screens. Walker Tech accused of data misconduct in health research project. CEO's personal relationship with consultant raises ethics questions. And beneath the bold print photos of him and Amira at the wellness center, their hands closed, their eyes meeting. By evening, it had spiraled beyond control. Anonymous sources whispered about favoritism, impropriety, a secret affair. Talk shows dissected her background, the mystic therapist, the diversity hire turned lover. Every word cut deeper than the last. Amira watched it unfold from her apartment, her phone buzzing with messages she couldn't bring herself to read. She turned off the television, but the noise seemed to seep through the walls anyway. When Ethan called, she didn't answer. She couldn't. He showed up an hour later, drenched again, his eyes lined with exhaustion. "They're wrong," he said the moment she opened the door. "It's not what they think." She looked at him, her voice breaking. "It doesn't matter what they think. It matters what this will do to you. I don't care about the company right now." "You should," she whispered, "because they will." He reached for her hand, desperate. "Amira, listen to me." But she stepped back. "Ethan, I've lived this before. I've watched how easily a woman like me can be turned into a headline. They'll say, I used you. They'll call it ambition manipulation, everything except what it really is. What it really is," he said, his voice rough, "is love." She looked at him, then truly looked, and for a moment the storm quieted. But only for a moment. Because both of them knew love had never been the only thing that mattered in a world built on perception. That night, as the rain fell endlessly outside, Amira sat by the window, her hands clasped in her lap. In the distance, the city lights flickered like dying stars. She whispered his name once softly, as if saying it might keep him safe. But deep down she knew, when truth comes into the light, something must be lost in its glare. And somewhere in another part of the city, Ethan stared at the reflection of his empire collapsing around him, realizing that for all his power, he could not protect the one person who had ever saved him twice. The storm outside never truly left Seattle. It just changed forms, sometimes falling as rain, sometimes appearing as words, headlines, whispers, sharp enough to wound. This time, it wasn't thunder that broke the silence. It was the sound of the world turning on Amira Johnson. The internet had decided who she was before she could speak for herself. The CEO's mistress, the healer who hexed the boardroom, the woman who knew too much about the man who saved her career. Every photo, every gesture, every smile she had shared in public was taken, cut apart, and fed to an audience hungry for scandal. She stopped opening her phone after the first 24 hours. The notifications came faster than she could delete them. Hate, curiosity, pity, venom, disguised as concern. When she finally turned off the screen, The silence that followed was worse. Across town, Ethan Walker sat in a boardroom that no longer felt like his. The company's senior partners, the same men who once toasted his vision with champagne, now spoke to him in tones usually reserved for children who'd made a mess too big to clean. "We sympathize, Ethan, truly. But this is unsustainable. Your personal life has become a liability. You need to make a statement, distance yourself." He stared at them, jaw tight, voice low. "She didn't do anything wrong." A woman from legal pushed her glasses higher, her expression careful. "That's not what matters. It's about perception." The word hung in the air like poison. That night, he called her. No answer. He texted. No reply. He drove to her apartment, stood outside her door, like a man who'd lost the map to his own life. When she finally opened, she looked tired, not weak, not broken, but tired in the way that comes from fighting battles no one else sees. "Amira, don't," she said softly. "Not tonight." He stepped inside anyway, dripping rain onto her floor. "They're making me choose." Her eyes lifted. "Between what and what? Between the company and you." Amira looked at him for a long moment, then turned away. "That's not a choice, Ethan. It's an ultimatum. I'll walk away if I have to." She shook her head. "No, you won't. And you shouldn't. Why not?" His voice cracked frustration, fear, love, all tangled together. "Because it's everything I've built. Because it's part of who you are," she said gently. "And if you lose that, you'll hate me for it. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but someday you will." He reached for her, desperate. "Don't do this." Amira's eyes softened, shimmering with unshed tears. "Ethan, the world you live in doesn't make room for someone like me. It barely makes room for you." "That's not true." She smiled faintly. "You've spent your life fixing broken systems with logic. But this isn't one of them. This is about people, and people believe what they want to believe." For a long while, neither spoke. The rain outside softened, as if eavesdropping. Finally, she said, "When I met you again, I thought maybe fate was being kind for once. I thought maybe this time it wasn't about saving your life, but saving your heart." He stepped closer, his voice low. "You did both." Amira closed her eyes. "Then let me save it again by leaving before it breaks completely." Ethan felt something inside him collapse, not dramatically but quietly, the way an old bridge gives way after too much weight. The next morning, she was gone. Her office at Walker Tech was empty, her desk cleared, her name erased from the internal directory. Only a white envelope sat on his desk. No address, no signature, just his name written in her looping handwriting. He hesitated before opening it, afraid that reading it would make it real. The letter was short, the words simple. But each one cut through him like clean glass. "Ethan, I know you want to fight for me. I love you for that. But some wars ask for surrender, not victory. I can survive the noise. I've done it before. But you carry too much to lose it all now. I don't want to be the reason you fall. I want to be the reason you still believe in love, in faith, in something bigger than power or pain. You once told me you didn't believe in destiny, that everything was data, probability, and design. Maybe you were right. Maybe this isn't destiny. Maybe it's just two people who met at the wrong time and loved each other anyway. And maybe that's enough. He sat there for a long time after finishing the paper, trembling in his hands. Days blurred into nights. The world outside moved on. Headlines shifted, the scandal lost momentum. But Ethan didn't. He went through the motions, meetings, statements, apologies, carefully crafted by lawyers. His company stabilized, but he didn't. His sleep came in fragments, haunted by dreams of her laughter, her touch, her voice, saying, "Stay with me." He'd wake to an empty room, to the same silence that had followed her since the day she left. Sometimes, in the quiet hours before dawn, he caught himself talking to the air, answering questions no one had asked. "Why'd you leave?" he'd whisper. Then softer, "Why does it still feel like you're here?" Weeks later, he found himself driving without a destination until he reached the place where it had all begun, the street outside her old therapy office. It was closed now, the windows dark, a for lease sign fluttering in the rain. He parked, sat there for a while, and finally let himself cry quietly, almost angrily, as if love were something he could wrestle into submission. He had loved her with the precision of a man who plans everything, and lost her like someone learning too late that not everything can be measured. And yet, despite everything, he found himself whispering her words, "Believe in something bigger than yourself." That night, as he walked back into his penthouse, he saw the city lights flickering across the skyline, reflections of hope, pain, and something like faith. He poured a glass of water, sat by the window, and stared at the rain, tracing slow silver lines down the glass. The world was quiet again, but not empty. Because somewhere out there he knew Amira was looking at the same sky and believing, as she always had, that storms didn't last forever. 1 year later, New York carried a different kind of noise. Not the sharp chaos of ambition, but the hum of lives trying to heal. The city had changed for Ethan Walker, or maybe more truthfully, Ethan had changed for it. A year ago, his empire had crumbled. Walker Tech had folded under the weight of lawsuits, lost investors, and his own refusal to play by the rules anymore. He'd watched it fall, not with anger, but with the quiet acceptance of a man who finally understood what it meant to let go. The world called it a tragedy. He called it freedom. Now he stood in front of a modest, red brick building in Lower Manhattan. The sign above the door read, "The Renewal Center, Mental Wellness and Healing for All." It wasn't a company. It wasn't built for profit. It was built for people, for those who, like him, had been brought to their knees by life and didn't know how to stand again. And it was built for her. Every wall, every quiet corner, every word painted on the murals, inside all of it, carried Amira's fingerprints, though she wasn't there. He had taken her words, "Believe in something bigger than yourself," and built something from them. The opening day was gray, the air thick with the promise of rain. A crowd had gathered, journalists, volunteers, and a few familiar faces from his past. Ethan stood before the microphone, a little older, his hair showing threads of silver now. But his voice was steady, calm. "I used to think success meant control," he began. "That the stronger you held on, the safer you were. But sometimes life teaches you that peace comes only when you finally let go." A murmur rippled through the crowd. "This center isn't about rebuilding wealth," he continued. "It's about rebuilding belief in healing, in kindness, in second chances." As he spoke, he glanced toward the back of the crowd, and for one impossible heartbeat, the world seemed to narrow into stillness. Because she was there, Amira. She stood a few rows behind the press line, wearing a simple cream coat, her hair pulled back, a soft scarf looped around her neck. She looked the same, and yet time had brushed new grace across her. Her gaze met his, and though a year of silence stretched between them, the moment felt like no time had passed at all. In her hands, she held something small, worn, familiar. A leather notebook, edges frayed cover, embossed with faded gold letters. "Everything begins again when we believe." The gift he'd given her long ago, Ethan faltered mid-sentence. His next words came softer, slower, as if meant only for her. Sometimes the people who save us do so only to teach us how to save ourselves. When he finished speaking, the audience applauded, but he barely heard it. His eyes were still on Amira, who offered the faintest smile before turning away into the crowd. He stepped down from the stage. His pulse quickened. He didn't even think, he just followed. She was standing near the garden behind the building where the noise faded into the hum of the city. "Amira," he said quietly. She turned that same calm composure she always had, though her eyes betrayed something gentler, something uncertain. "Ethan." He took a breath, unsure whether to smile or tremble. "I didn't think you'd come. I wasn't sure I would," she admitted. "But when I read about what you were doing here, I wanted to see it for myself." He nodded slowly. "It's yours as much as mine. You know that." She shook her head. "No. You did this. You inspired it." "Maybe," she said softly. "But inspiration doesn't build walls and programs and hope, Ethan. You did that because you finally believed." He smiled faintly. "You were the reason I learned how." They stood there for a while, the distance between them filled with everything they hadn't said. Finally, he spoke. "After you left, I kept reading your letter. I memorized it. Every word. It used to hurt, but now it feels like the only thing that ever made sense." Amira looked down the corners of her lips, trembling. "I didn't mean to hurt you." "You didn't," he said. "You made me see who I was and who I wanted to be." She lifted her eyes and he saw tears there, not of regret, but of something quieter. Relief, maybe. "I used to think I broke you," she whispered. He shook his head. "You didn't break me. You freed me." A gust of wind swept through the courtyard, carrying the faint scent of rain. For a moment, Amira laughed softly the way she used to. "Do you ever wonder," she said, "why life brings certain people back when we least expect it?" "All the time," he admitted, "but I've stopped asking why. Now, I just ask, what do I do when they come back?" Her eyes sparkled with something between joy and fear. "And what are you going to do?" "Ethan Walker." He stepped closer, closing the last bit of distance between them. "I'm going to try again," he said simply. "Not to fix what broke, but to build something new, something real." The rain began then, gentle, like it had learned tenderness since the last time they'd stood together under it. Amira tilted her face toward the sky, laughing again. "It always rains when we meet." Ethan smiled. "Maybe that's the universe's way of blessing us." She turned to him, her voice barely above a whisper. "You still believe in the universe now?" He looked at her for a long, quiet moment. "No, I believe in you." And for the first time in years, that belief didn't feel like surrender. It felt like peace. Later, when the crowd had gone and the evening lights began to flicker on, Amira walked through the new center, tracing her fingers along the walls, reading the framed quotes from patients and volunteers. In the main hall, a mural covered one wall, a swirl of blue and gold, painted by local artists. At its center were words written in elegant script: "Everything begins again when we believe." She smiled, her eyes glistening. Behind her, Ethan approached quietly, his voice low. "I wanted people to see your words," he said. "They changed me. Maybe they'll change someone else." She turned, meeting his gaze. "You never stopped believing, did you?" He shook his head. "I couldn't. Even when you were gone, it felt like you were still here, in every piece of this place." Her eyes softened. "Maybe because this is where you were always meant to end up." He smiled a small, grateful smile. With you? She didn't answer, but she didn't need to. Outside, the rain began to fall harder, tapping softly against the windows, the same rhythm that had followed them through every chapter of their story. And as the lights inside the renewal center glowed against the gathering night, Amira and Ethan stood together, no longer bound by fate or fear or the ghosts of what they had lost, but by something far simpler: faith, the kind that survives even after the storm. The rain had returned to New York that evening, soft and silvery, the kind that blurs the skyline and makes the world look half-dreamed. Inside the renewal center, the last of the guests were leaving. Laughter and gentle conversation faded into the night, replaced by the steady percussion of raindrops on the windows. Ethan Walker stood by the glass doors, his reflection mingling with the city lights. Behind him, the words painted across the lobby wall shimmered faintly in the soft light. Everything begins again when we believe. He had built this place with those words. He had built himself again with them. But what he hadn't expected was to see her not just as a memory or a ghost, but as something real and warm and still standing in front of him after everything. Amira Johnson. She was talking quietly with one of the volunteers, her voice calm, her smile genuine, the same as it had been that first day in Seattle when she told him about faith and storms and starting over. Ethan found himself walking toward her before he even realized he was moving. When she turned, their eyes met. It wasn't a moment of fireworks or revelation. It was something quieter, deeper, a recognition that had outlasted distance and pain, the way the sea recognizes the shore, no matter how many tides have passed between them. For a long while they said nothing. Words had never been their problem. Timing had. Amira broke the silence first. "You rebuilt it," she said softly, nodding toward the glowing sign outside. He followed her gaze. The Second Chance Project, the name he had chosen in her honor. "I didn't rebuild it," he murmured. "I just stopped pretending I had to build alone." Her lips curved into a small smile. "You finally learned to share the burden." He chuckled under his breath. "You were right about everything you know. About control, about surrender, about faith." She tilted her head, teasing. "That's a long list. You'll have to be more specific." Ethan stepped closer, his voice lower now, the air between them dense with what had never been said. "I used to think the universe had made a mistake, that we met at the wrong time, in the wrong way. But maybe," he paused, his gaze steady on hers, "maybe the universe wasn't wrong. Maybe I just wasn't brave enough to believe." Amira looked at him for a long time, the soft rainlight catching in her dark eyes. Then gently, she reached for his hand. "Ethan," she whispered, "destiny isn't something that finds us. It's something we stop running from." Her hand in his was small, steady, real, and in that touch the world righted itself. Outside, the rain began to fall harder, streaking down the glass, like silver threads pulling them back to the place where it had all begun. For a moment they stood there, the hum of the city fading, the lights reflecting like constellations across the wet pavement. He could feel her heartbeat through her palm, the same rhythm he had once felt when she had pulled him out of the wreckage 3 years ago. Back then, it had been the sound of survival. Now, it was the sound of home. "I spent so long searching for logic," he said quietly. "For reasons. But there's no logic to this." Amira smiled, her voice barely audible. "That's because love isn't a problem to solve, Ethan. It's a truth to live." Her words landed softly, but stayed heavy in his chest. He looked at her, then really looked at the woman who had walked through every storm life had offered, and still stood here, calm, unbroken, beautiful in her resilience. "You once told me control was a lie," he said. "You were right. But so was my fear." Her expression softened. "Fear is just faith in the wrong direction," he laughed quietly. "You always have an answer." "Only because I learned the hard way," she said. Pain teaches what comfort never could. A flash of lightning lit the sky beyond the glass, white and clean and fleeting. The world outside was drenched alive. Ethan stepped closer, close enough that he could see the droplets clinging to her lashes, the soft rise and fall of her breath. "Do you ever think about that night?" he asked. "The crash." She nodded slowly. "Sometimes. Not because of what happened, but because of what it began." He looked down, emotion pressing against his throat. "I think about it every day, about how easily I could have died, how you appeared out of nowhere, how everything since has led me back to you." She smiled, then that same gentle, knowing smile that had disarmed him from the very first day. "Maybe you didn't die that night because part of you wasn't ready to live yet." He took a slow breath, his fingers tightening around hers, and now her answer came in a whisper that trembled like the rain outside. "Now you are." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of breath of forgiveness, of the kind of peace that comes only after a long, hard war. Ethan lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. And then, when she met his eyes again, something in both of them gave way, all the distance, all the waiting, all the unspoken longing. He leaned in, and she met him halfway. The kiss was quiet, tender, inevitable, the kind that doesn't ask for permission, because the soul already said yes. Outside, the rain fell harder, a rhythm steady and endless. They didn't pull away, not this time. When they finally broke apart, Amira rested her forehead against his chest, listening to the familiar heartbeat beneath the fabric. Ethan whispered into her hair, "Do you think the universe is satisfied now?" She laughed softly. "The universe doesn't need to be satisfied. It only needed us to stop pretending we didn't belong." He smiled against her temple. "So, no mistakes then?" She shook her head. "No. Destiny never gets it wrong. We do until we learn to listen." Outside, the rain slowed, fading into a hush that felt like a blessing. The city lights reflected on the wet pavement, painting gold ripples across the glass. Through the window, the sign above the door glowed bright against the night. "The Second Chance Project." Amira turned to look at it, her fingers still laced with his. "It's a good name," she murmured. "Fitting." He smiled. "For both of us." She looked up at him, then eyes glistening, and for a heartbeat, the world felt suspended. No past, no pain, no fear. Just the quiet miracle of two people who had finally stopped running. Later that night, long after the lights were turned off, and the city slipped back into sleep, the rain began again, softer this time, more like a memory than a storm. In that sound, there was no sadness, only rhythm, only life, only the echo of everything they had lost and found again. And somewhere in the quiet, as they stood together beneath that same sky, where it had all begun, Ethan whispered the words he had been waiting to say for years. Not as a confession, but as a truth, finally set free. Maybe destiny doesn't choose us, Amira. Maybe it just waits until we're brave enough to choose it back. She smiled, her hand tightening around his. "Then let's not run anymore." And as they kissed once more under the gentle rain, the city's lights shimmered through the glass, spelling out what the universe had known all along. That some stories aren't written to teach us about endings, but about the grace of beginning again.